This is Choose the Bear, where we dive deep into the power and joy of living a vibrant, independent life on your own terms. This podcast is your go-to source for smart, fun, and insightful conversations about what it means to embrace independence and live the life you choose. I'm Kat Calvin, and together we'll explore how this movement is challenging outdated stereotypes, redefining success, and empowering people to live their best independent lives. Hey everyone, just a quick intro. Today we are talking to Lauren Bean Buitta, the CEO of Girl Security. This is a conversation that I was really excited about and that I knew was really relevant, but I feel has gotten even more relevant every single day. And for me, when I've been thinking about this episode over the past few weeks while watching the news, I just keep thinking, this is why we need more girls in national security. So I'm so excited for you to hear it. The link to Girl Security's donation page is in the show notes. Please give them a donation, give them a follow, see if there are maybe some girls who might be really great at national security, who maybe should get involved. This is such a cool program and they've done such an amazing job with it. And I'm so happy it exists and really, really thrilled that Lauren was able to be on the podcast. So I hope you enjoy it. Well, everyone, we are in for what I think, I already know because we've already been talking and I'm so jazzed already, is going to be a really unique conversation. When I thought about doing this podcast, I really wanted to get as diverse a perspective on being a woman in the world, whether you're single or child-free or just like what those different sort of ideas can be. And when I saw Girl Security, I was like, we've got to have these folks on the podcast because I think what they're doing is really interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about this art project because it's so thrilling. I've been geeking out about this forever. We actually had to postpone this interview and I have been just sitting on like all of my excitement for weeks because I've been so thrilled to have this conversation. So I'm here with so excited, I just threw my pen.
Here we go.
Here we go. We're ready. With Lauren Bean Buitta, who is the CEO of Girl Security. And welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me and creating this really amazing space for people.
Thank you. So as I like to just have folks introduce themselves, tell us, who are you and what you do, however you'd like to define that.
Yes, my name is Lauren, and I think probably first and foremost, I feel like I'm a mom. I have two little ones, but I'm also founder and CEO of Girl Security, which is a lifelong passion project that I considered or sort of incepted when I was in my early 20s, but it took me about 15 years to actually put my words into action. And the organization is focused on advancing girls, young women, and gender minority populations, primarily from at-risk or underrepresented or disinvested communities, I prefer to say, into critical national security pathways, and to help create opportunities for their perspectives to sort of bubble up to thought leaders and decision makers who are making some of the most important decisions on behalf of not just the United States, but the entire world.
I love that. I like disinvested communities. I'm going to steal that.
I'm like big on that one.
Because it was like, we were saying vulnerable for a while and that didn't feel good. And then it was targeted, but I really don't like that. But disinvested, I'm stealing it.
I don't even know if it's a word, but I've just decided it is.
It sounds wordish.
We're just going to make Webster's dictionary, please hear us for word of the year, whatever it is.
There you go. Shakespeare invented words. We can all. So I actually first discovered Girl Security through the What We Carry project. Can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, it's an artist whose work, Kaylee McDonald, a beautiful body of work. You can find her work on Instagram and her website. It's really designed to shine a light on the ways in which violence against women and other marginalized populations is becoming increasingly prevalent, and to situate the ways in which those populations are sort of forced slash required to carry weapons or other types of self-defense tools on a day-to-day basis. And from the perspective of girl security, it really, Kaylee's work just brought to life sort of, I would say, like the spirit of the girl security mission, in the most powerful way. So it's really sort of spotlighting the trends, the increasing trends of violence against populations, especially online where it's spreading, and sort of interrogating this idea of should we have to carry self-defense tools on a day-to-day basis, and why is that, and why have we normalized it?
Yeah, I mean, I found obviously the work really powerful and the conversation. I feel like I'm ever since the deeply traumatic for I think everyone Kavanaugh hearing, we've had a lot more conversations around uh, women and women's security, and there's so many companies coming out with sort of like fashionable like, security
Yes,
implements.
whole market.
There's a whole new market, which, at first was really shocking to me. But then when I thought about it, and then when I had a lot of conversations after Kavanaugh, I realized, like, oh no, I get so much more of why women are carrying these things. And we've been having conversations on this podcast about femicide and violence against women and how prevalent it is around the world. And so for me, I thought Kayla's work and that whole project was really beautiful, but I loved the fact that you, as a security company, you're focused on national security and all these other things, that you recognize the importance of art and the importance of highlighting this particular issue. How did you, I mean, even come up with the idea of, beyond just sort of looking at Kayla's work and saying like, oh, that's great, but of really implementing it into a project with your company, and something that we don't see a lot of companies do is like take on a whole art project.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, I think at the core, I mean, something about my own background was I was sexually assaulted in my position in national security, um, when I was 25. And so for me, when I founded Girl Security many years later, and then as a parent, I didn't know that my own experience with sexual violence would become such a central part of our work. But national security, like many other sectors that are male dominated, sexual violence is extremely prevalent across most sectors, whether it's technology, intelligence, military, policy, government, academia. I did not anticipate how the narrative around sexual violence would become such a core part of our work and how we talk about our work. The flip side of that is going into it, many of the decisions we make in the name of national security, many of our national security priorities, and we're seeing this happen with AI. We want to be competitive. We want to generate as much AI. We want to create it. What often happens when we make those types of national security decisions are that girls and women and other marginalized populations are usually the first to experience the harms of that, or are the first to experience broad-based types of harm. The internet sort of has catalyzed one of our, first national security inventions, has catalyzed a lot of gender-based tech-facilitated harms. So we felt that taking on the campaign was a way for us to bring national security's relevance and impact to people in a much more, I think, intentional and sort of visceral way that like words on a page or a website or just like talking about your model would not. And I think it really did achieve what we hoped it would.
Yeah, I mean, I one of the things that I love about it is I recently was listening to like a podcast or something, and there was a man and a woman, and the woman was talking about the ever-present human trafficking signs that are in
Yeah.
every public women's bathroom on the planet. And the guy had no idea what she was talking about. He'd never
Yeah.
seen one. And she was floored because how are these not in men's bathrooms? And he was floored because he was like, there's what in women's bathrooms? And it was one of those moments of realizing, oh, even when we're walking on the same exact path, we're living in two very different worlds. And I think
Yeah.
our project does such a good job of illuminating a thing that men don't understand of like, no, women are walking around with weapons because that's how
Yes.
safe they both are and be feel. And it's not a thing you can even comprehend, which is why
Yeah.
women talk about assault or microaggressions or whatever. It doesn't seem like a big deal to you because you don't understand that there's a whole like product category of like everyday weapons for women. And I think you're right. The art, particularly with someone as talented as Kayla, who I'm crazy about her Instagram. She's really just
She is.
wonderful. But it was so real, and I think that can hit people, uh, and particularly people who don't have to worry about this issue in a way that words just can't. So I thought it was a really
Yeah.
really powerful use of art.
I think it was too. And I think the reactions, something that because of like just family exposure, I'm really cognizant of is just childhood trauma, which of course is it doesn't discriminate. Many people come into spaces with trauma, men, women, gender minorities, people of all different identities. And so it's been interesting to sort of see the way that men who've experienced trauma have come out to sort of talk about the campaign in a positive way, sort of saying, even in my own trauma, I didn't recognize sort of the ways in which that arming of women has become this normalized, sort of like you said, there's a growing market for self-defense tools. But something that we talk a lot about at Girl Security is, girls and women, and especially girls of color in the communities we serve, and I think more broadly, have every reason to sort of be disenfranchised. And in the national security space, when we think about disenfranchisement, we think about like radicalization and things like that. Yet we're so uncomfortable with girls reacting to anything. And we're so uncomfortable with them expressing, emoting things that are so atypical of what society has deemed sort of normal or acceptable. And so there's this dichotomy where we're sort of arming girls and women because we've created this demand and need for it, yet we would be really uncomfortable if populations of girls and women started to become violent or leverage those tools, leverage those weapons. What would that look like? And it's a really uncomfortable conversation for people to have around what would it look like if girls became violent in reaction to being violated. And I wonder, would we pay more attention? Would they not be penalized? There's so many questions that I think this campaign prompted that we felt like we really wanted to make a focal point of our work and how we talk about it.
Yeah, I think about this all of the time because there is a part of me that thinks every time we are assaulted or attacked by a man, a group of women should come together and just kill him. But we also
Vigilantism.
exactly, but we also see that when women protect themselves against abusive men or their assaulters, the rapists, whatever, the women are the ones who end up getting punished.
Yeah.
We live in this
Yeah.
society, and so much of that is because the eyes of the people who are still in charge of the justice system, which is mostly men, mostly white men, still don't understand and don't see what the threat really is. So I'm, as someone who is in your position in a national security space, taking on this art project, I found just really fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
So the other thing, you brought up AI, and I had a question. One of the first questions on my list was about technology because, especially now, and it's funny because as I was thinking about this interview the other day, I saw like Mark Zuckerberg's just like headfirst dive into MAGAism, and I was like, oh, this is going to be great for everyone, especially women. Um, and we're seeing that technology is in many ways worsening and normalizing violence against women and hatred of women. While at the same time, I think a lot of us still have hope that technology can really be a solution in many ways. How do you see this issue, and how do you think we can address it? How is Girl Security trying to address this?
Yeah, I think that's a really critical tension is balancing the negative harms with the more affirmative possibilities of artificial intelligence and other technologies. I mean, our whole approach is like, first of all, we really pride ourselves on not telling girls in our program what to think. We try to scaffold for them, this is how this issue has come to fruition, or this is how this term has been defined. And so, with respect to artificial intelligence, we try to let them know that a lot of the large language models and architectures upon which what we know as AI were built were not, they were shaped by like 10 or so theorists. And they're being socialized and built upon the data that's being used, where again, women, data regarding women, diverse people is also not represented on the, not only just diverse people, but generations as well. So you have ageism sort of baked in there. So we're sort of using systems that were built with a very limited scope. The systems are growing based on a model that is not expansive or inclusive with respect to the data it's being trained on. Yet the harms, again, that's what I think is so sort of compelling about this issue, is the harms are targeting the people who were neither involved in the development of the technology and whose data is not necessarily primarily being used to train the technology. So here we are once again with another development in which girls and women are sort of on the front lines of this issue. And so the way that we tackle this in our program is both to create a space for girls and participants to have hands-on understanding and learning around how would you design this differently? Like when you get to that space, and it may be now because we have a lot of youth who are active in our program, who are also in the sort of development ideation stage, how would you do this differently? Then it's also working across stakeholders and industry leaders to amplify the voices and insights of people in our program to say, hey, we know that this is something that you're really focused on, but by the way, a girl in our program we just had a deep fake made of her, and that was shared across her high school. So trying to compel developers, thought leaders, policymakers to understand that these first harms are an indicator of something far more broad-based that is important. And then I think we also try to leverage the work of Dr. Valerie Hudson, who's this remarkable professor out of the University of Texas, Austin, whose whole sort of theory is that a country is only as stable as the population of girls and women are safe. And trying to really push that message that so long as we keep creating things, technology sort of being this next development phase of that thing we're doing to innovate, so long as girls and women are sort of on the front lines and being harmed, the effects of that will be cascading. It won't just be contained to girls and women. There are different impacts of that. So that's sort of how we think of it. I think it's really hard to watch the unsteadiness of the decision makers and the developers of the technology sort of go back and forth when there's plenty of movements like Girl Security and many others saying, hear us out. Like there's a better, more responsible way to be doing this. All you have to do is stop and listen to people. Um, and I want to be more optimistic, but I think part of it is putting our hope in the generations and in giving them the best level of support that we possibly can, because these are intergenerational challenges. They're not going to be solved with single generation thinking.
Oh, so true. Before we go more into some of these other questions, can you just break down for folks like what do girl securities programs actually look like?
Yeah, so we have a field building effort, which is really focused on equipping girls and young women starting at the high school level who seek a job or some other type of opportunity in this space with learning and training. So I think we have probably one of the coolest like workforce programs out there. It's very hands-on, it's very applied learning, it's all cohort community based, it's all identity centered and culturally responsive and trauma informed. It's just a really rich program. We also have a mentorship program, so folks can be mentored by someone who's really cool, doing something really cool that they want to be, sort of working in. We have a series of sort of what we call like direct representation opportunities. So for participants in our program, we get them on panels, we put them in front of Congress people and decision makers, and again, create that sort of supportive space for them to amplify their ideas on things. And then we also do something called alternative research. So we try to listen to the population we're serving, factor in their thoughts on some of these really big issues like AI and quantum computing and climate impacts and infectious disease, and actually model scenarios leveraging the insights and concerns of the population we're serving, which are the younger generations. And really, again, sort of do a lot of advocacy around how do we think differently? How do we think more inclusively? How do we think more long term about these challenges that we know are going to have impacts for generations to come? So all of our work is really youth centered as well, which is something our entire organization and community is so genuinely committed to in a space when I think there's a lot of lip service paid to young people. We're really committed to centering their voices in our work.
I mean, when you think national security, you don't think
No.
awesome young women. Like that is the last thing.
I know that has to change. That has to change. We try to tell people it's a political realm in a sector like anything else. It's just like healthcare. It's a broad-based sector where there's many different pathways, but there's also many different impacts for people. Cybersecurity, I feel like, is one that's become more prevalent for people, that these are not foreign conflicts, although there are plenty of those. These are issues that impact you personally, your community, your family, your economy. We need young people to want to understand what national security is because it's, as we always say, it's the most powerful political realm in the world.
Well,
We
and
need
it's
that.
so wide reaching. I mean, as we were just discussing, you know, I don't this hopefully the fires will be out by the time this episode comes out.
Yeah.
But we're for the listeners, we're talking right now as the LA fires are happening. And when we think about major disasters like this, there are so many different national security impacts.
Mhm.
Right? When we think about, I was just reading another article about Sudan and everything that's happening there. And right, like climate change causes famine, which causes war, which causes violence against women and causes terrorist cells and all of these things, right? And I think that when people think about national security, they think about like old men in uniforms in the situation
Yeah.
and don't really realize how wide ranging national security really is and how we go from all of these things happening around the world to those old men in the situation room.
Yeah, it's so true. And what I think is positive or changing is people within the national security sector recognizing that, it's a weird space. Like it's a space where, again, the decisions we make in the name of national security impact everyone, but people have not been central necessarily. It's this really strange thing where the community in theory is serving people, but people as a focal point tend to kind of not be primary. And I think that that is changing for people. I think there's a lot more commitment to next generation, to making the narrative feel more inclusive. But boy, we have a lot of work to do to close that gap. And like we're a small, fragment of people wanting to do that work and seeing its importance. Because for you, the reasons you noted, uh, climate impact, water shortages, food insecurity, infectious disease. These are challenges that have no borders and boundaries. We cannot insulate ourselves from these challenges. Um, and I think the more young people can understand about the field, the more, I mean, viable solutions can be, the more sort of included they'll feel in policy discussions that they're probably reading about on TikTok or whatever. I mean, the TikTok ban is like another great example. It's a national security issue. I mean, it's everywhere. It's literally everywhere.
Have you seen that COVID changed people's perspective on this? I find that sort of in different people learned and didn't learn the lessons that I think we should have learned. But one of the things that I, as a person who works with unhoused folks, and I'm this is wait, what did you call the population?
Disinvested. Yeah.
Disinvested. I was going to say disincentivized, and I was like, that's too
Yes.
many. Disinvested communities is this reminder that disease does not care about your gated community. And so maybe we should make sure the unhoused folks are, and like in Skid Row, have what they need because disease will reach Beverly Hills, whether you like it or not. And I find there's so many lessons like that that we could have learned from COVID. Do you find that there are any particular lessons that the national security community either did learn or didn't learn and should have?
I always think of a story when I was working in national security, which was shortly after 9/11. And at the time, in the years that followed, there were a number of biological threats. And so there was, an issue by DHS to have sort of like a go kit in your basement that included masking tape, as if masking tape, if you sealed yourself, it would prevent a chemical attack from seeping through the doorways. And I just remember sitting around the table with a lot of national security people and everyone sort of laughing, knowing that these guidelines weren't going to be efficient. And any of the like extra food supply storage, people were like reaching in and grabbing that thing of spaghetti sauce or that thing of, whatever. So I try to approach this through the lens of someone who, I don't know, life is hard, right? And like demanding. Um, and so like when people's there's a point to what I'm saying is when people's basic needs are met, they have the privilege or the luxury of being able to be concerned about these really big issues. But because so many people's basic needs are not being met, I think it's very hard to prioritize this like potential one-off catastrophic event occurring. And I think there's again this sort of because basic needs are not being met, there's this evolution of this relationship between government and humanity. What should government be doing and not be doing? What should people be responsible for and not be responsible for? And I think we're at a really important turning point with respect to that dynamic, especially when companies are playing an increasing role in how we think about security more broadly. So I don't think that there were lessons learned necessarily. My hope is that, like our generation living through September 11th, that people will pass along the lessons. I mean, I think the importance of oral history is so critical. They will pass along the lessons of what COVID did. My concern is that COVID was sort of a dry run for something that is much bigger. And as you said, that will impact everyone. And so where I think there's like a real opportunity is to focus on building societal resilience on a local level, building those networks of resources and support on a local level, like with what you're doing. That work is critical.
Well, thank you. I certainly think so, even if I can't get anyone in Congress to agree. But one of the things that this makes me think of too is how much national security has become global security. You know,
Yes,
I
yes.
mean, look, we have bird flu now, right? Like COVID didn't start here. Everyone's getting on planes everywhere, and I think the word national security makes us think about our own borders, but we don't really have borders anymore.
We do not.
I'm
And yeah.
Yeah, so I'm curious too about sort of what your take on that is and how you think the I know saying national security community, it's very broad, but sort of like what the thinking is around, particularly if we're thinking about, yeah, I don't think COVID is clearly it isn't the last biological threat we're going to face. Personally, I'm an introvert. I loved lockdown. I would love another lockdown. Give me another year at home, please. I'm back here. But like obviously there are other things coming. We've had monkeypox, we've had bird flu. Those haven't gotten as big, but there are so many more things coming with the incoming administration, and potentially RFK Jr. being in charge of the CDC, we could all have Ebola on January 22nd, right? We have no
Gosh.
idea. And so, like, what are the sort of concerns or the ways that that's being addressed by the national security community?
I think your point is like so spot on. I'm so delighted that you said that because honestly, like every great visionary in national security will say that there is no such thing as a national security issue anymore. Everything we're dealing with is global security. And I think the reality is again, I think this field is just like full of dichotomies and hypocrisies and all of those things where you have an increasingly globalizing world shaped by geopolitical events, as you noted. Yet you also have communities more isolated than they've ever been. Yet you also have people more connected online than they've ever been. So there's this like weird thing between the sort of the openness, the growing openness of our country, but also the isolation that we may feel, as neighbors and friends and communities. In terms of how the national security field is thinking about it, I don't think that there is sort of a broad-based approach to it. I think there are certain sectors of the national security field, like the intelligence community, that think in what I would say is probably the most responsible way, which is to model out, a certain number of years or decades, what these different trends may look like when they all start to coalesce. Where it tends to stop, though, is okay, so how do we take what we think may happen, sort of forecasting, and help shape policies and decisions in the short term? And that is really something that girl security pushes on, which is to say, a lot of the national security leaders and thinkers are thinking about this worst case catastrophic event. AI being weaponized to mutate a gene that results in a biological attack. And we're sort of saying, like, yes, that can happen, but girls are being denudified on an app. So, like, we can actually start to take some of the steps that we're talking about now, which is like education, raising awareness, building non traditional alliances and partnerships, preparing educators and community leaders and social workers and coaches and people working on affordable housing and all the issues that we know are on the ground. But just not there yet. I hope that there is a linkage between the sort of high level national security thinking and the local level. Just not there yet.
So for the everyday noob like me who's just wandering around living my life, but I want to stay on top of like what's happening in national security, or like what are ways that people can stay connected to what's happening even if we are not in the national security community whatsoever.
I mean, I honestly set up news alerts for national security because you'd be shocked at how much news I do it just for fun. I mean, you'd be amazed at how many times national security is cited and like in expected and unexpected ways every single day within a local, national, and global context. There's obviously like some traditional outlets like foreign affairs and foreign policy and lawfare that are really good if you kind of like want to take a real deep dive. But read as many different types of news sources, even the ones that make you want to gag, because all of the power plays,
Mhm.
regardless of what your political opinion is or your belief or faith in institutions, it's all happening in the national security space. So I think just being aware of the influence that it has is really important. And honestly, like I think the TikTok ban, it's not a ban, but the forced sale of TikTok is like, to me, sort of like the quintessential national security issue, which is it's the national security community coming in and being like, hey, this is a really big threat because the Chinese government is stealing people's data and all these bad things are going to happen. But creators and kids and people here are saying, like, hey, we make a living on TikTok. It's how we socialize. And so the issue is framed as like you're balancing privacy from a national security perspective, national security, but the national security community has thought to come back around and say, but it's also economy, humanity, social connection, mental health. That is sort of the algorithm of national security over and over and over again. So young people being in that space, all people being in that space, I think is really critical. And knowing how your congressperson is
Yeah.
addressing these issues and your state rep, like knowing how the local leaders in your community and state are involved, again, like a very close touch point to some of these issues.
I have to ask because we are exactly a week away from the inauguration, which I woke up and I realized this morning and immediately just went right back under the covers. What are some of the top national security issues that you think are going to come up at the beginning of this new administration?
I think technology is going to be one of the more predominant because it has such close ties to the economy. I think obviously energy, climate issues is going to be a big one. I wish public health and health more broadly was going to be a central issue. Immigration, of course, is going to be the narrative that will continue to play out, and that's the problem. So much of the national security narrative is fear-based, and in completely misinformed way and harmful way. Um, you know, the nature of some of the foreign conflicts, I think, will not be as prevalent in the discussions, early on in the administration. But I think obviously, again, that's where the public plays such a critical role in all of this. And I think that's the harmful thing about national security, the way it's been presented, is there's this perception that people can't participate in it. But think about all of the issues I just named. Those are all local
Yep.
issues that have localized impacts for people. And I think there's going to be a swirl of dis and misinformation, as there always is around elections and other events. There's a lot of great reporting and sort of analysis coming out of some institutions, but I think the big thing will be to focus on what's passed in legislation. I think that's where I would suggest people focus your eye on what's actually passed, what's actually recorded in the Federal Register, as opposed to what you see on any number of media outlets, because disinformation is designed to make you mad and sad and angry, and it works really well. So for like the state of everyone's mental health and well-being, I think trying, if one can, has access and ability to focus on what you actually see as passed in legislation or otherwise recorded. I think that's going to be very important.
So many issues. I'm obviously you are going to be even more needed in the next several years as you already are. So how can our listeners support you?
Honestly, just like I said, learning, just doing a quick search of what national security is, I think is like really, it's that is helpful to our mission because national security's legacy is complicated and it's not a perfect system, just like any system is not. So I think what helps us is if people understand why diverse populations are needed in national security. And doing that requires just a quick, like, what is national security?
That's great. I'm also, for the listeners, putting the donation link in the show notes.
Oh, thank you.
Helping the girl security. Check out the programs. I'm where I do you work in all 50 states or where do you
We
mostly?
do. We're national. We have a regional focus in Chicago on the south side, which is where I'm from. So we do work nationally, but we have some regional work occurring that we're really drilling down there.
Cool. Well, so folks, also if you know a girl who might
Yes.
be interested in national security or you think should be, the link to Girl Security will be in the show notes, as well as social media. Thank you, Lauren. This was really fascinating, and I think so important for everyone to have this discussion, but particularly through the lens that I'm trying to focus on. I almost said we, as if there's anyone else involved with this podcast.
I love it.
The
I love
royal
it.
we,
The royal we. Yes.
of women really being able to live joyful solo lives or child free lives or whatever. Like security and safety is a real concern, and these issues and the What We Carry campaign is just so wonderful and so powerful. So thank you so much for what you do and for being on the podcast.
Thank you for what you do and for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and of course, leave a review. Until next week, here's hoping you find joy in your solo life.